Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to join you this evening to discuss a topic that's really important to me, but also that I find incredibly disconcerting, and that's the fact that my people don't vote. And you're probably out there wondering, who are her people? Is it Black? Is it Latinx? Of course I'm talking about Americans. All Americans, regardless of race, creed, and political affiliation. In fact, roughly 50 to 55% of Americans show up at each presidential election. In the midterms, however, we rarely break a 40% turnout. 2008, in fact, was our most recent highest turnout election. It was also the most diverse American electorate we've seen, with 61% of voting eligible Americans casting a ballot. The number you'll see on your screen is a percentage of voting age population, which is lower because there's a number of different things that intersect with voter turnout and ability of an American to vote. Okay. Before that, it was in 1968, in Nixon versus Humphrey and Wallace, again at the 60% margin of voting eligible population. 2016, that diversity did not show up. In fact, white Americans showed up at virtually the same rate as for Romney in 2012, but we see a very precipitous drop-off of Black and Latino voters in that same election. In order for Americans to, in order for our democracy to be strong, to be an inclusive democracy, we have to have diversity showing up at the polls. If you look at this chart, everything on that side of 1920, it was an electorate of all white men. And I argue that our democracy, in order to be strong, needs to have a diverse electorate, and in order to produce candidates that address a broader spectrum of issues that are important to the American population. Voter turnout, voter satisfaction is super low. But in order for our democracy to be strong, we need to have a sense of investment and a sense of encouragement and belonging within our American electorate, and that's not currently happening. In fact, most Americans tie their right to vote intrinsically to their sense of freedom, but they're really unhappy with what they're seeing on their ballots. So how can we do better? There's a lot of ideas out there to address this low voter turnout, but one of these things, and what a lot of other countries have done to address low voter turnout, is compulsory voting. And to that I say yes, please. So if we compare the United States with other countries in the Americas that are democratic elections, Uruguay, that has compulsory voting, sees 97% voter turnout. Out of these 19 countries in the Americas, the United States is 15th in terms of voter turnout at 53%. Australia does this. Australia has a 30-year average voter turnout of 95%. 30-year average. Overwhelmingly, Australians really like, or are really okay with compulsory voting, and the young folks, age 18 to 24, they're totally cool with it. And I use totally cool because that's their language. So why would this be good for us? Because we're not the Latin Americas, we're not Australia. Well, better government, and increased accountability in our leadership and legitimacy of our leadership, and campaigns that are focused on the issues and not exorbitant amounts of money being focused on get out the vote. We're also going to see a greater sense of belonging, because when historically marginalized populations are turning out to vote because they see candidates representing issues and values that mean something and resonate with them, I mean, that alone, in my opinion, would be a strengthening of our democracy. And we can also see some revenue from enforcement of compulsory voting, if that's how we choose to enforce it. I'm against, by the way, jailing anybody for not voting. Okay, America is overall not very good at it. But the naysayers will say, oh, voting is a civic right, not a civic duty. It's a violation of constitutional rights. Well, to that I would say, what about this? And that? And this? Right? It does not cost too much money. It doesn't infringe on our freedom of speech. And, you know, if they don't like the party, they can go with a third party. So, but let's think about these benefits locally, right? Would aldermen pander to the huge developers if they knew that everyone was going to show up and vote for the kind of revitalization they really need? Would the state assembly pander to the likes of the NRA or the charter school lobbies if they knew that the people showing up had had enough? Do we really value our diversity and the issues that we care about most? Or are we content with the marginalization that occurs in this system today? Thank you.